Hi, welcome. I'm Dr. Mark Davies, and this is Building Resilience While Confronting COVID-19, a video series for BCEHS personnel. Hope everybody's doing well out there today. So today we're looking at pillar number 4, which is how to choose things that are helpful over things that are not helpful. But before we start, I want to answer a question somebody wrote in, and Christine asked, Dr. Davies, how do you know when mental health is kind of, tanking a little bit? Well, that would have to be personal hygiene. We have a saying in the mental health profession, if they look like hell, it's probably where they're heading. So why is it that we have such a hard time looking after ourselves, choosing what is helpful with what isn't? Dr. Lucy Hone, who is a resilience expert out of New Zealand, does a great TED Talk in the 3 secrets that all resilient people practice, talks about how she had to practice her own resilience after the loss of her 12-year-old daughter, who was tragically killed in a car accident. And this is one of the key principles that she came up with, is what I'm doing helpful to my situation or not helpful to my situation? And she cites the time where, after the loss of her daughter, she had been sitting alone at home all day going through old photo albums of her daughter and just sort of pining and aching and grieving. But she realized that she wasn't really grieving all that well. She was just wallowing in it, that it wasn't helping her move past what she needed to move past, which is easily one of the hardest things any of us would ever have to do, is to deal with the death of our children, I'm sure. So she just asked herself, is this helpful? And she said, no, it's not. And she closed the book and moved on. And that's what resilient people do. Resilient people have a habit of kind of monitoring their behavior, monitoring their thought life, and going, is this helpful or not? Now, many of you remember, if you've taken my seminar, the battery exercise, where I divide you up into what's a zone out phase versus what really recharges your battery. This is a graph very similar to that, and it's a way of thinking. And you can download this graph and again begin to write activities that fill in the 3 columns. So what are activities that you do that you know are not good for you, that are unhelpful to you? It's a second glass of wine, it's maybe eating too much pizza, snapping off at home, whatever it is, zoning out for hours on end, whatever it is, it's not helpful. Right? And then there's kind of neutral activities, maybe doing crosswords or Sudokus, just things that they don't really help you all that much, but they don't hurt you. They're actually not negative. And then what are the things that you do that are really, really positive? And here's a simple chart. And really, honestly, just begin to fill those things in, to begin to actively think and self-monitor yourself and go, okay, is this helpful, or is this, kind of a neutral activity, or is this not helpful? And so that's what we want to focus in on today. How do we begin to really, given all the stress and pressure we're under, how do we really begin to build in more helpful activities than not? Because what happens, and the propensity and temptation is to give in to the not helpful. It's almost like I'm giving so much in the office, screw it, I'm not going to do anything good for myself at home. But that leads to rapid burnout and depression, anxiety, and a whole host of other problems. So we're going to focus on choosing what is helpful. But that can be very hard. So research shows that about 80% of all people who try something new, let's say going to the gym, within three months are no longer going to the gym. Huge drop-off rate. 3 weeks to 3 months is your highest drop-off rate. People will white-knuckle it for 3 weeks, and then if they don't have a plan, they drop off. Why? Because they're over-relying on willpower. The world expert on willpower is Roy Baumeister. He wrote a great book on it. And really, what it is, it's a muscle we use in our brain. And it's often the brain being at odds with itself. So if I ask you to put your hand in ice and keep it there, your brain goes, I don't want to do that, right? But there's another part of your brain at war with it. Now you're burning all kinds of glucose, and your brain is working really hard. It's at odds with it. And anytime we try to break an old bad habit, that's really hard to do. Anytime we try to form a new habit, that's really hard to do. It's that saying, neurons that fire together wire together. So whatever we do a lot of, the brain really gets in the habit. And if we go to stop that, it's really hard. But of course, neurons that fire apart wire apart. So we can stop it. We can change the brain. The brain is really plastic. And that's what we want to do. But we're setting ourselves up for failure if we don't understand the nature of willpower. That willpower is a muscle we use in the brain. And yes, it can get stronger the more we use it. But like all things, no matter how strong you are, there's a limit to your endurance, all right? So any new activity that you do feels like this. It feels like grabbing this barbell and it's hard work and it's kind of easy to give up. If you do that for several months, it begins to feel like that. It doesn't take near as much willpower to do it, right? Because the brain has habituated to it. Now, what's the fly in the ointment? The fly in the ointment is that all day long at work, you're using willpower. And it's kind of a medium weight, and you're using it all day long. And with first responders and the nature and the crisis of what they're doing, you're using high levels of willpower, right? And so you're doing this all day long. And by the time you get home, your arm is exhausted. And so if your spouse says, can you take out the garbage, or can you do the dishes, and you snap off, or you want to do something that's productive, but you just watch TV instead, it's because you're exhausted. You don't have this feels like this, right? So whenever we're relying on willpower, we're in trouble a little bit. What we want to do is have strategies that can reduce that big heavy weight we've been lifting to a much more manageable medium weight. That's going to help us succeed much better. And there are strategies to do that. So what we want to do is rely less on willpower, which is trying. I'm going to try to do something. If I hear people say, I'm going to try this, I almost know they're doomed to failure. Versus training. So what is training? Well, training is you go after it in a disciplined way. You actually reduce that big heavy weight. You make it less heavy. You make it a medium weight because you plan for this new activity or plan to break this activity. You have a strategy. That's called training. And that reduces our reliance on willpower significantly. So, for example, if I get up every morning and decide whether or not that I'm going to go for a run, that really burns a lot of willpower. And the predictor is that eventually I'll stop running. It'll be rainy, I'll be achy, I won't go today because I'm in the moment. That requires a lot of willpower to choose that. However, if I've got a running schedule that's on my refrigerator and I follow it every day, it reduces the amount of willpower. Just that movement reduces the amount of willpower that we use, and we're much more likely to succeed. So what I want to do with the time that we have is give you a strategy that you can use in almost any circumstance. It can help you work out more, take up a musical instrument, reduce your bad habits of eating. Whatever it is, it can help you stop doing things and start doing more productive things. And it's a method of training. So that's what I want to do today is give you that, and then I want to use a working example of how we can do that. The number one New Year's resolution every year is diet. It's also the one that usually goes out the window the quickest. The most successful diet plan in the world, according to research, is the Beck diet solution. It's written by Judith Beck. She's the daughter of Aaron Beck, who really is the father of cognitive behavioral therapy. And her book takes a rather different approach than any other diet book. It doesn't mention food at all. In fact, if you read the top, it says it works with any diet. She kind of says, any diet you want is good, just grab one, they'll all work. Her whole focus in her book is to change the way you think first before you try to go on a diet. So she asks a bunch of motivational questions. She gives guidance about cognitive distortions about food. So she's really focused on of getting you to develop a strategy before you even enter into the diet. 70% of all people who go on the Beck diet plan under her supervision succeed and keep the weight off within a year. That is an amazing statistics when it comes to diet. So it's a little bit different because it focuses on the way you approach it first and the way you think about it before you get into behavior. And that's the method I want to use. I'm using kind of borrowing her formula, her recipe for a diet for this segment. And again, what I'm proposing is that this template or this method that I'm trying to suggest to you can work for a lot of things. It can obviously work for diet. It can work for getting in shape. Whatever thing you want to do that lessens the negative in your life and improves the positive. Again, that's what resilient people do. Is this helpful or not helpful? So I want to use a working solution, and the working solution I'd like to use is anger. Why anger? Well, because it's pervasive. It's pervasive in our society. It's all over the place, and COVID-19 is, jacking up stress. And as you can see by the chart at the top here, the more stress we experience, the more likely we are to fall into angry behavior. And anger is very addictive. Almost any other emotion kind of says, well, check yourself at the door. I can be depressed, but I don't really have a reason to be depressed. Or I know I'm anxious, but I shouldn't be this anxious. But not anger. Anger kind of always goes, yep, I'm angry. I'm angry as hell, and I have every right to be angry. So it's very addictive. It's very powerful, and it can really begin to own us. We really can be like the Hulk all the time, right? And so I want to address this because word has it, it's a real problem right now among BCEHS personnel. So that's my working solution. And the second reason I want to address it is because anger usually costs us a lot. It usually costs us a lot in relationships. It's not always something that really gets us where we want to. We can bully our way into it, but we're often not satisfied. And the final reason is that anger is a highly negative predictor of happiness. The more angry you are, the more anger you express in life, the less happy you are likely to be. Now, there is a counterbalance of people who never show anger and stuff their anger, and they need to release their anger. But that's not what I want to talk about today. What I want to talk about is people who feel very free about expressing their anger, and how do you rein this very, very powerful emotion in. And I want us to look at kind of the 6 areas that we'll look at as we go through it. 6 questions that have motivational questions, such as why should we change? How can I understand my anger? How do I behave when I'm angry? What beliefs, what payoffs? There's often a payoff about anger. What are my traps? Where do I get stuck in anger? And what can I do instead? What are strategies I can use to get out of that? And so this is kind of a heavy homework thing, but again, anger is really a very powerful emotion, one that's very hard to defeat. And kind of like a diet, this is a big one. This is going to take a lot of willpower to wrestle anger to the ground. So the more strategies you have in place, the more likely it is for you that you can succeed. And again, the principles are not just for anger, but that's going to be our working example. So let's look at what can we do to lessen anger in our lives. So what Beck suggests in her book is that you actually take, those old index cards you used for recipes, the little, I think they're 3x5, and just write out each of these 6 questions and keep them in front of you and review them every day as you do it. So this isn't about doing it all at once. It's gradually and unfolding. So you work through maybe question number 1 for the first 4 or 5 days, and then move on to number 2, and then on to number 3. It's a gradual process. We're not trying to do this all at once. We're trying to gradually break you in. Kind of like, again, going for a run. We're not going to get you to run 10 kilometers right off the bat. We want you to run 1, and then maybe 2, and then 3. So it is a pen and paper exercise. You can do it obviously on your computer if you want, if that's better for you. But the whole point is you want to be able to think this through while writing it out and be able to bring it back to yourself to keep yourself motivated. So it's just as much about training your brain to think about these things, and the more you think about these things, the greater mastery you will have on them. It's interesting, they did a basketball study years ago where they had 3 groups, and the one group shot 20 hoops a day, and the other group imagined shooting 20 hoops a day, and then the other group shot 10 hoops a day and imagined shooting the other 10 hoops a day. And the group that improved the most was the mix, was the ones that shot 10 and then imagined shooting 10. So it's the behavior but the brain, and that's what we're trying to engage here. We're trying to engage your brain in whatever activity you're going to try and do. So the number one thing is, why change? What's my motivation? Why do I want this either out of my life or into my life? And with anger, typically what we want is we want it out of our life. And so you just simply write out why. There might be a lot of reasons, and you take your time. Maybe it's costing you relationships. Maybe you're alienated loved ones. And you can always tell if you have a problem with anger if everybody around you is saying, you got a real problem with anger, and you're the only one going, no, I don't. It's a little bit like a drinking problem, right? So write it out. What is the cost? And what's the benefit? There's always a benefit. There's always a payoff to anger. Often you get your way, you shield yourself, you protect yourself, but there's often a real cost to that. And looking at some of those costs, sometimes it just leaves you exhausted. Sometimes you just don't even like who you become. You become this rude, kind of doofus person, and you can embarrass yourself publicly through your anger. So I don't know what your anger style is. I don't know what your costs are. I don't know what your benefits are. But again, pay attention to the fact that you're getting some sort of secondary gain here. There's some sort of reason why you like your anger, but then there's also a cost. So why would you want to change? Just take your time and begin to write it out. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is as you finish up with the motivation, move on to try to understand your anger. What is really going on behind your anger? Anger is not a primary emotion. It's a secondary emotion. Anger is something that we usually use to protect ourselves. So you can see this iceberg with all the different reasons for why we might display anger instead of feeling lonely, instead of feeling sad. We know, for example, that anger, to diagnose depression with males versus females, is that males will display much more anger when they're depressed than females. It's socially normed that males, it's easier for them to feel mad than sad. Who wants to feel sad, which feels very vulnerable and disempowering, and when you can feel mad, which feels very empowering, right? But again, there's usually a cost to that. And I know myself, my own struggle with depression, my anger is by far, it's close. It's tied between the sadness and hopelessness I can often feel when I'm depressed. But probably the number one overt symptom of those experiencing me is they notice how much shorter I get. It just takes so much more work for me to hang on to it, right? And so just knowing that really what I'm feeling is sad rather than mad is very helpful. It's a helpful maneuver. It helps kind of understand and manage it. You look at what's going on with it rather than just trying to out anger it. You'll never really get rid of your anger by being angry at it. You can do that. You can get mad at yourself for being mad. Well, that's feeding the fire. What instead you need to do is replace that with understanding. The 3 major causes of anger are fear. I'm afraid of something. Something threatens me. I might be embarrassed. Whatever it is, there's some sort of threatening thing out there that I don't like. So what I do is I become the Hulk to confront it. Or frustration. I'm not getting my way. Traffic is slow. I'm going out of my mind here. I was in Home Depot the other day, and there was this little old lady in front of me talking to the salesperson for half an hour asking him pretty much the same question. And I'm kind of doing everything I can. I'm gnawing on my finger. I'm, trying to play a game on my phone. To keep my frustration level in, because I'm not the world's most patient person. And after she left, he turned to me and he said, she's in here every day and does that. And I go, how do you do that? And he goes, well, she's old and, she just, I think, is lonely, but it is hard on me. I just know that one day I'm going to be like her. And I thought, wow, this guy is really, really good. But it was frustrating for me, very frustrating, because I just wanted to get out of the store. My daughter was in the car and she wasn't feeling good. Anyways, when we get our goals blocked, that's a major reason. And then finally, the last one, and perhaps the most important one, is hurt and pain. And this particularly has to do with interpersonal relationships. When we feel shame, when we feel embarrassed, when we feel bad about who we are, when we feel like somebody that we love is betraying us, or attacking us, or not respecting us, we'll display anger. And just kind of asking yourself, what's going on underneath that? Why am I mad? Then you can begin to understand that, I felt attacked by my spouse, or I felt betrayed by my spouse, or unsupported, or disrespected, or whatever it is. And then you can begin to put words on that and address that. And then you don't just take off with anger. Anger doesn't allow us to see things well. We literally see red and we just attack. And then we feel kind of good that we've fought back and protected ourselves, but usually with very little accomplished. So to really take time to understand your anger. You will not defeat your anger by out-angering it. A lot of people try that. No, you want to try and get close to it, kind of pet it, calm it down, self-soothing, understanding what's going on with yourself. Really critically important. What is going on? The third thing is learning how we behave. Does your voice get high? Do you pout? Do you get silent? Do you withdraw? What physiologically goes on for you? Just understanding the physiology of anger is really helpful. I know, we all know about hangry, right? We all get hungry and then we display anger. Well, it's because physiologically we're on edge. If we're too tired, if we physically feel a lot of pain, we're going to display anger. So just knowing the many faces of anger that we have and how we display those faces and what's going on physiologically with our body. Can we read our body? One of the strongest methods for anger management is cognitive behavioral therapy, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute. But one of the quick, dirty ones for road rage is not cognitive behavioral therapy. That's a good one for road rage. But a really quick, dirty one is to get people in the car and begin to notice their body, how tense their body is. What's their body like? What's going on with me? Because if they're tense when they get in, they're primed. They're ready to get angry at anything. But if you can get them to really focus on their body and relax and bring it down, guess what? Their tolerance for stupid behavior on the road is much more. So kind of understanding what's going on when you are angry. How do you behave? What ways do you act? What goes on for you physiologically? What's the feeling like in your body? How can you counteract that? All right? That's another really important thing. So you would write that out. What are the typical ways that you behave? The fourth one is what beliefs and benefits support my anger. So you can see this chart, and an incident happens, and then we interpret that incident. And so I walk by my neighbor and I say hi, and he doesn't say hi back. Okay, so now my belief is, well, what did I do to tick him off? Or why is he being such a jerk?
Man, is he unfriendly, right? So the minute we begin to interpret that, and we do that in a nanosecond, now we're starting to feed anger. That belief system feeds anger, right? If instead we kind of just go by our neighbor and, hey, hi, and they look up and they don't say anything, and we go, oh, he must be absorbed with a problem, or maybe he's had a fight with his wife or his spouse. Whatever it is, we can have thoughts that really turn it down. So usually we have triggering thoughts about things. We have almost a mindset, a way of interpreting things. So, for example, in traffic, when people cut us off, we think they're doing that on purpose. Or, and this is a hard one to defeat. I have to admit, this is a hard one to defeat. But we just go, they're idiots, they're stupid, they're idiots, they're stupid. The problem with people who do dumb things and then we interpret that they're idiots or stupid is that allows us to get angry about stupid people. And guilty is charged. But it just doesn't help us any. It just doesn't help us any. Instead of focusing on what they're doing on the road, we need to focus on what we're doing on the road. So what belief system do you have that supports your anger? And that can be a generalized belief system. I have every damn right to be angry about this. And nobody in their right mind would not be angry about this. That's a common belief system we have that supports our being angry. Really? Really? Nobody? Is it appropriate? All right. So that's a global belief system. And then there are typically specific situations that I want to get into in just a minute. The next one is, what are my traps? I've been here before. Typically, we have areas in our life that that trigger anger. It might be a common fight we have with a loved one, a friend, or a spouse. That we talk about finances. Finances might be something that automatically gets us going, or the way they put away the food. Or the way they don't look after the rooms if you have kids. And it just gets in this cycle of anger. And you know the second that you open that conversation, that's where it's going. Or you go into situations that are going to cause anger. So you're going to a call and it's a heart call, but it's really a hangover. How many of those have you had? How frustrating is that? That's like pull your hair out frustration, right? But if you know it, why get angry? Why prime up for that? Why not de-escalate? How can you think your way out of that? So knowing what your traps are, just beginning to write out in a very systematic way, these are things where I habitually get angry. And that's where we can really knife in and tackle it and begin to bring your anger down. Because now we know what the trigger is. And then we go back to the previous one and we're going to see what the thoughts are. And we're going to see, are there different ways now of interrupting that process in a more constructive way so you don't end up with anger. Because really, honestly, at the end of the day, if you go to, for instance, you have a call, you have somebody call in and it's one of those stupid calls and you're on the phone and you're trying to deal with them. Whatever your role is, you're trying to deal with something that's very, very frustrating. At the end of the day, very typically, the only person that really pays for your anger is you and your loved ones. So there is a really high motivation that you can have to really try and lessen this. It typically only hurts you. So this is for you. Do you have a right to your anger? Yeah, sure. Why not? Knock yourself out. The question isn't that. The question is it helpful? Is it useful? Is it giving me a happy life? Or is it making me more miserable? Very typically, in the vast majority of cases, anger today is actually making you less happy. The cost is way above the benefit. I love this poem, Life in 5 Chapters. I walk down the sidewalk, there's a giant hole, I don't see it, I fall in it, it's not my fault. It takes forever to get out. Chapter 1. Chapter 2, I walk down the sidewalk, there's a giant hole, I see it, I fall in it, it's still not my fault, it takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3 is I walk down the sidewalk, there's a giant hole, I see it, I fall in it, it's a habit, it is my fault, I get out immediately. Chapter 4, I walk down the sidewalk, there's a giant hole, I see it, I walk around it. Chapter 5 is I walk down a different sidewalk. That's how this process looks. It's not instant, I got rid of anger yesterday. That's not the way it works. It's you got to know your holes, and you got to figure out your holes, and you got to figure out why you fall in them, and you got to figure out how to climb out of them. And the more you do that, the better you're going to get at that. And then the better you get at that, the more you're going to be able to avoid those holes. So that is what that is about. And so one of the ways you can do that is by following this chart. So this is just a downloadable sheet. It's kind of a template of basic cognitive behavioral steps. You'll find it in a lot of different workbooks. But it's a way of monitoring and understanding your anger. So it's not trying to change it, it's just trying to monitor and understand it. So for 3 weeks, you can download this sheet, as many sheets as you need, and then run it off and fill it out. What was your triggering event? And what were you feeling? And again, take some time to understand not just anger, but were you feeling tired? Were you feeling embarrassed? Were you feeling ashamed? Or were you feeling frustrated? Whatever it is, take some time to really think about it. That's the point. It's not just a timesheet that you're trying to fill in as fast as you can. What did you think? What are the thoughts that support that anger? I mean, I have a right to that. They're really lazy. Why did they do that? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How did you act? I stomped off, or I yelled, or I whatever I did. And then what were the consequences of that? Well, then my spouse didn't talk to me, or I had a lousy day at work, or whatever it is. I stewed in my own juices for quite a while. So you just begin to monitor, and don't do every time you're angry, but pick out 2 or 3 juicy ones a day. And at the end of the day, kind of go through it. Why did I get angry today? What was I feeling? What did I think? And how do I act? What are the consequences? So this is just kind of understanding it and monitoring it. And then we move on to the final part of all of this, which is what can I do instead? What are the strategies I can do now that I understand my anger and trigger? How can I really begin to get on top of it? And there's a whole bunch of interventions you can use. You can deep breathe. 5 deep breaths. Hold in for 4 seconds, and then out for 4, and then breathe in, hold, out, 4, combat breathing, brings you down. De-escalating, how do I not feed my anger? How do I calm myself down? It's called self-soothing. How do I just kind of get myself off the edge? Rather than thinking the thoughts that I do that really fire me up, what can I do to bring it down? Well, it's no big deal, blah, 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 whatever it is. How do I detour? How do I get out of things? So sometimes when I come home from work, I've had a really stressful day and a bad day, and things are tough at home, I'll actually say, I'll go for a walk in the woods, or I'll go up to my office and I'll go, I need a half an hour. So I will remove myself from the situation. I really honestly, when I can do that, I'll remove myself from the situation. And then what I want to do is I want to intentionally de-stress. I don't want to feed it. I don't want to go into my room, which you can do so easily. You can go into your room and just think of all the reasons why you have a right to be angry. That's putting, the fire out with gasoline. It's like, no. How we want to de-stress, right? And so knowing what things you do actually de-stress you. Maybe it's a walk in the woods. Maybe my office is an incredibly safe space for me. It almost automatically de-stresses me. Soft music de-stresses me. It brings me down. So figuring out what are the things that de-stress you. And then finally disputing. So what can you do to dispute the thoughts that support your anger? And that's the second worksheet that I have on the website that you can download and use. So what's the triggering event? What was your response? And then what were your thoughts and actions in the moment? And then what can you alternatively think? So my thought was that idiot that cut me off is an idiot and he endangered my life and he's trying to kill me. Instead of maybe he's on his way to a crisis. For real. It's not impossible. That can be happening. Maybe, I've driven like that at times. I've been an idiot driver too. So what alternative thoughts can you begin to systematically replace, especially in those traps, in those repetitive anger situations that I talked about earlier. So, you come home and things aren't done in the house and you were hoping they would be, and you go, everybody's so selfish. Well, is there alternative thoughts? They were busy, they had a hard day, that are legitimate. You can't replace it with BS. That's critical. You can't BS your way out of that. That's not what I'm promoting at all. But you might have to get very creative for this. And finally, what alternative reactions could I do? What alternative reactions can I do? The anger workbook, there's several workbooks on anger out there. I think the anger workbook is as good as any. It's really good. Matthew McKay seems to have the formula. And I would commend it if you're really struggling with this and want to take it one step further. One of the things that he does right off the bat is make a compact with yourself for 24 hours, that no matter what happens in the next 24 hours, you're going to act calm. It's not that you're necessarily calm. You can be angry, but you're going to act calm, and you actually sign it off. So he has a very, very in-depth, step-by-step way of leading you through. It's a very gentle book, excellent book. I give it to a lot of my clients, and very helpful. And so the principles I'm talking about here are fleshed out much more. But what we want to do is we want to understand our anger, and then we want to give ourselves alternative ways of thinking about it and alternative ways of acting. That is the ultimate key. All right. So that's basically that 6-step procedure that I talked about before. And it can be used for a lot of things. We've used it for anger today. But I think that's what resilient people really do. They choose what is helpful over what is not helpful. Perhaps one of the greatest movies about resilience is The Martian. Everybody loves Matt Damon. He's in World War II, and the whole platoon goes across Europe to get him, and he's in Mars, and the whole world races to Mars to get him. If you're Matt Damon and are lost, you're going to get found. I tell you, that guy is deeply loved. So bring him home. Get the Martian home. But it is an incredible movie about resilience, about how he just is stuck in this planet alone, how he digs in and survives. And at the very end of the movie, he's back, he's home safe, and he's addressing candidates in the NASA program at a university. And this is the last scene, it's the last speech. And I think it's just a perfect way to end resilience. And he says, at some point, everything's going to go south on you. And you're going to say, this is it. This is how I end. Now, you can either accept that, or you can get to work. That's all it is. You just begin. You do the math. You solve one problem, and then you solve the next one, and then the next. And if you solve enough problems, you get to come home. And that's the formula. The formula is solving problems. It's choosing helpful behavior over non-helpful behavior. That's what resilient people do. I hope this is helpful. And I want to encourage you in the good work you're doing. Thank you for listening and watching. Take care.